Chapter 11. The Illusion of Blessings. The morning air was thick with fog as Elizabeth pulled up to the small cafe where she had agreed to meet David and Kyra. The last few days had been a whirlwind of discoveries, each more disturbing than the last. They were getting closer to uncovering the full extent of Patricia's deception, but with every step forward, the danger seemed to multiply. Elizabeth's car came to a halt, and she sat there for a moment, staring at the cafe's front window. It wasn't just Patricia's lies they were up against anymore, it was an entire network of people who had tied themselves to the same dark forces that Patricia served. Powerful people who could ruin them with the snap of a finger. She stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at her skin, and made her way inside. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and the warm scent of coffee greeted her, a small comfort in the midst of everything that was happening. Kyra and David were already sitting at a corner table, their heads bent close together, speaking in low voices. When they saw Elizabeth, their eyes filled with both relief and concern. "Glad you could make it," David said, offering a strained smile. Elizabeth nodded, sitting down across from them. "What have you got?" Her voice was steady, but inside, she felt the weight of everything they had uncovered pressing down on her. Kyra leaned in, her voice low. "I've been digging through more of Patricia's personal files, looking for something that can tie her to the Marine Kingdom for good. There's no denying her influence anymore. She's using people in the highest places, businessmen, politicians, even law enforcement officials. They've all been feeding into her power." Elizabeth's heart sank. She had suspected it, but hearing it out loud made it even more real. "So it's not just about money, is it? She's building an empire, one that's untouchable." David looked grim, his gaze steady. "It's much worse than that. Patricia's not just controlling people for profit, she's controlling them for power. There's a ritualistic element to what she's doing. She's performing ceremonies, selling blessings that are nothing more than illusions." "Blessings?" Elizabeth asked, confused. "What do you mean by blessings?" Kyra glanced at David before speaking. "It's what she calls them. Miracles. When people come to her, seeking healing, she tells them that she can give them a blessing, a divine gift. But what she's really doing is binding them to her. She sells them the idea that they are receiving grace from God, but in reality, they are being trapped in a cycle. The more they give, the more they become dependent on her. It's not about faith or salvation, it's about control." Elizabeth absorbed Kyra's words, the horror of it all settling deeper in her gut. Patricia had turned something sacred into something sinister, twisting it to suit her own needs. People weren't just paying for miracles, they were selling pieces of their souls. "This has to stop," Elizabeth said, her voice tight with emotion. "We have the evidence now. We can expose her. But how do we break her hold on all these people?" David leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. "It won't be easy. Patricia has too much influence. We can't just go to the police or the media. They're already under her control. We need something stronger. Something that will make people see the truth." Elizabeth's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous their situation became. But Patricia wasn't invincible. There had to be a way to break the illusion. "I have an idea," Elizabeth said, her voice steady. "But we'll need to get inside the church, inside her inner circle. I'm thinking of something bold. Something that will shake the foundations of her ministry." Kyra looked hesitant. "What are you planning?" Elizabeth's gaze was resolute. "I'm going to confront her in front of our congregation. I'll expose the truth about the mirror, the fake healings, and her ties to the Marine Kingdom. I'll make her reveal herself. I know she can't resist the attention. She'll try to silence me, but that's when we'll strike. We'll show the world that she's nothing more than a fraud." David's brow furrowed. That's dangerous, Elizabeth. If Patricia finds out what we are planning. I know, Elizabeth interrupted. But it's the only way. We've been gathering evidence, but now we need to show it. People need to see the truth. I'm not afraid anymore. I've seen the way Patricia manipulates the weak, the vulnerable. I've seen the toll it takes. I'm done sitting on the sidelines. We have to expose her, or she'll keep destroying lives. Kyra and David exchanged a look, their faces filled with concern. Elizabeth could see the fear in their eyes, but she also saw the resolve. They had all seen too much to back down now. All right, David said, his voice low and serious. But we need to be smart about this. We can't just walk into that church and expect things to go as planned. Patricia's power is more than just her followers, it's the way she manipulates the truth. We need to counter that. Elizabeth nodded. I'll need to gather more evidence. We'll need witnesses, proof that Patricia's miracles are nothing but staged performances. And we need to expose her connection to the marine kingdom. That's where her power really lies. Do you have the people who can help? Kyra asked. We'll need allies. People who can stand up to Patricia's lies. Elizabeth thought for a moment. I know someone. A former member of the church who saw the truth years ago. They've been gathering their own evidence. They might be able to help us get the final pieces we need. David nodded. Then we start gathering everything we can. The truth is our weapon now. And we can't afford to fail. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their task hanging over them. They were about to take a massive risk, one that could cost them everything. But there was no other choice. Patricia's reign of deception had to end. Chapter 12, The Mirror of Manipulation. The weeks that followed were a blur of planning, strategizing, and gathering more evidence against Patricia. Elizabeth, Kyra, and David worked tirelessly, putting together a case that would reveal Patricia's deception for all to see. But the deeper they dug, the more the stakes grew, and every step closer they got to the truth felt like they were walking through a minefield. Elizabeth had never imagined it would come to this. She had come to the church hoping for something real, something that could help her grow spiritually. But instead, she found herself immersed in a world of lies, manipulation, and dark forces she couldn't fully understand. Every revelation about Patricia's powers only made the stakes higher, and now, with the final confrontation looming, Elizabeth could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on her shoulders. There was no turning back. The plan was set. They would gather the final pieces of evidence they needed, expose Patricia's fake healings, and reveal her ties to the marine kingdom in front of the congregation. It was risky. It was dangerous. But it was the only way. Elizabeth had a lead, someone who had witnessed one of Patricia's rituals firsthand. The informant had reached out to her, offering to provide damning evidence that Patricia wasn't just a false prophetess, she was an occultist, connected to dark forces that no one could fully comprehend. The informant had promised to meet her in person, at a secluded location on the outskirts of town. Elizabeth and Kyra drove out together, the silence between them thick with anticipation. The sky was darkening, the first stars appearing in the sky as the sun dipped below the horizon. It felt like the calm before the storm, and Elizabeth's mind raced with questions and doubts. What would they find? Would this be the final piece of the puzzle? Or would it be the beginning of something even darker? As they arrived at the meeting spot, a small, run-down diner on the edge of town, Elizabeth couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. She had come so far, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Something was coming. They parked the car and walked inside. The diner was empty, save for a lone figure sitting in the far corner. Elizabeth couldn't see their face, but the silhouette was unmistakable. The figure looked up as they approached. It was an older man, his face weathered and tired. His eyes were deep set, and there was a nervous energy about him that made Elizabeth's stomach churn. "You must be Elizabeth," the man said in a low, gravelly voice. "I'm Jacob. I have the information you need." Elizabeth nodded, sitting down across from him. "What do you know? What did you see?" Jacob leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was there, in the room, when Patricia performed the ritual. It was like nothing I've ever seen before. It wasn't just some prayer. It was a summoning. A calling. She was speaking to something not of this world. I don't know exactly what it was, but I saw her transform. Her eyes changed. Her voice changed. It wasn't her anymore. It was like she became something else." Kyra's eyes widened as she listened, but Elizabeth remained focused, trying to absorb every word. "What happened during the ritual? What did she do?" Jacob's hands shook slightly as he spoke. "She called out to the marine kingdom. She offered a sacrifice, a piece of herself. It was like she gave up a part of her soul, and in return, she was granted power. She became more than just a woman. She became something else. And I saw it. I saw the creature she became." Elizabeth's heart skipped a beat. "A creature? What do you mean?" Jacob's eyes darkened as he leaned back in his chair. Her body, her skin, it shifted. Her features became distorted, like a serpent's, and her eyes, God, her eyes, they glowed with an unnatural light. It was like she was in communion with something ancient. Something that's been around for centuries. And it wasn't just power she gained. It was control. Control over her followers. Control over their minds. Over their spirits. Elizabeth's blood ran cold as she processed what Jacob had said. Patricia hadn't just made a deal with dark forces, she had become a vessel for them. And that power wasn't just for her, it was for the marine kingdom, a force that used Patricia to manipulate and control everyone around her. "But why?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would she do this? What does she want?" Jacob looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. "She's obsessed with power. She's always been hungry for it. She started as a simple woman, a servant of God, but then she met Pastor Benji. He introduced her to the darker side of the ministry, the side where real power resides. Once she tasted it, there was no turning back. She wanted more. And now, she's addicted. She can't stop." Elizabeth's mind was spinning. Everything was making sense now, but the truth was more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. Patricia had sacrificed her soul for power, and now she was using that power to control people, to create a network of influence that spanned far beyond the church. It wasn't just about wealth or fame, it was about domination. "She has to be stopped," Kyra said, her voice firm. "We can't let her keep doing this to people. We have to expose her for what she really is." Elizabeth nodded, her eyes steely with determination. "I know. But we need more evidence. We need to show the world what Patricia really is. We need to show them her true nature, her connection to the marine kingdom. This isn't just about exposing her lies, it's about saving everyone she's deceived." Jacob sighed, glancing nervously around the diner. "I've given you all I know. But I warn you, this isn't going to be easy. Patricia has eyes everywhere. If she finds out what you're planning, she won't just stop you. She'll make sure you disappear." Elizabeth leaned forward, her resolve stronger than ever. "We're not backing down. We'll make sure the truth comes out. Even if it costs us everything." Chapter 13, The Betrayal. The sun had barely risen when Elizabeth stepped out of her apartment, her mind buzzing with the information they had just uncovered. Jacob's revelations had only confirmed what she had suspected. Patricia was more than just a false prophetess, she was a vessel for something ancient and dark, something that thrived on power and manipulation. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, but with each new discovery came an overwhelming sense of urgency. Elizabeth knew they had to act fast before Patricia's influence grew stronger, before she could bury the truth once again. Kyra had been hesitant about confronting Patricia directly, but Elizabeth was certain that it was the only way. They had to expose the truth in front of the congregation, to rip away the illusion that had kept so many people trapped in Patricia's web of lies. As Elizabeth made her way to the cafe to meet with Kyra and David, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Kyra. "Meet me at the church. Something's happened. I need to talk to you." Elizabeth's stomach tightened. The urgency in Kyra's message was palpable. Whatever had happened, it wasn't good. The church was quiet when Elizabeth arrived. There were no signs of activity outside, no cars in the parking lot, and the heavy door was locked. She knocked twice, but there was no answer. Growing more anxious by the second, she pulled her phone out again, dialing Kyra's number. It went straight to voicemail. Frustrated, Elizabeth glanced around. The dark shadows of the church loomed over her, an ominous feeling settling in her gut. She had been to this place a dozen times before, but now it felt different. It was as though the walls themselves were watching her, as if she had stepped into a trap that had been set long before she ever realized it. Just as she was about to turn away, she heard a faint sound from the back of the church, a door creaking open. Elizabeth spun around. Kyra emerged from the shadows, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with fear. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hands shook as she reached out to Elizabeth, her voice barely a whisper. "They know. They know what we are planning." Elizabeth's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "Who knows?" Kyra glanced over her shoulder nervously. "Patricia's followers, one of them saw me leaving the cafe yesterday. They know I've been talking to you. They know everything." Elizabeth felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you saying Patricia knows we're onto her?" Kyra nodded, her face grim. "She knows. And she's not going to let this go. We're not just dealing with a false prophetess anymore. We're dealing with someone who has the power to destroy us. She's already made her move." Elizabeth's mind raced as she processed Kyra's words. The truth was finally out in the open, and now Patricia was coming for them. But how had she found out? Who had tipped her off? "Did you tell anyone?" Elizabeth asked, trying to remain calm despite the rising fear in her chest. "No," Kyra replied quickly, shaking her head. "I didn't tell anyone. I swear. But it doesn't matter. Someone must have overheard us. Someone who's loyal to Patricia. They've been watching me." Elizabeth's heart raced. They were running out of time. They couldn't afford to be careless now, not when they were so close to bringing Patricia down. But if Patricia had eyes everywhere, if she knew their every move, how could they possibly expose her? "Then we have to act fast," Elizabeth said, her voice hard with determination. "We can't wait any longer. We have to confront her, but we need the evidence. We need the witnesses. And we need to be smart about this." Kyra looked at her, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if we can do this anymore. Patricia has too much power, Elizabeth. She's untouchable. She'll destroy us if we keep pushing." Elizabeth placed a hand on Kyra's shoulder, her grip firm. "You've seen the truth. I've seen it. We're not backing down now. We're not going to let her keep controlling people's lives. If we don't expose her now, it will be too late. We're the only ones who can stop her." For a moment, Kyra didn't respond. But then, slowly, she nodded. "You're right. We have to do this. But we need help. We need someone on the inside, someone who can get us access to Patricia's inner circle." Elizabeth considered this for a moment. She already knew what Kyra was suggesting. There was one person they could trust, someone who had been part of Patricia's church for years and who had already started questioning her motives. But if they reached out to him, it would be dangerous. They had to be careful. The last thing they wanted was to give Patricia any warning about their plans. I know someone, Elizabeth said finally. David. He's a former member of the church. He's seen what Patricia is capable of, and he's been gathering evidence on his own. He can help us. We'll meet with him tonight. Kyra hesitated. Are you sure? David's been in hiding for years. What if he's changed his mind? Elizabeth's jaw set with determination. We don't have a choice. We need him. And if Patricia has already found out, we have to act now, before she silences all of us. Chapter 14, The Unseen Enemy. The revelation hit Elizabeth like a punch to the gut. Kyra, the very person who had been her ally in this fight, the one who had risked everything to expose Patricia's lies, was somehow connected to the woman they were trying to bring down. The fear and disbelief in Elizabeth's chest were overwhelming, but she fought to keep her composure. Are you sure? Elizabeth's voice was steady, but inside, her mind was racing. Are you absolutely sure, David? Could it be someone else? David nodded, his expression grim. I've been following the patterns. Kyra's been on Patricia's radar for months. I don't know the details, but Patricia has people watching. She's been tracking anyone who gets too close. And I'm afraid Kyra has been compromised. Elizabeth's heart sank. She turned to Kyra, whose face had gone pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. Kyra, is this true? Have you been in contact with Patricia's people? Kyra opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She seemed to shrink into herself, unable to meet Elizabeth's gaze. I don't know, she said quietly, her voice shaking. I didn't tell her anything. I swear, Elizabeth, I didn't. But, they've been watching me. They've been following me for weeks now, ever since you and I started getting closer. They know everything about me, where I've been, who I've spoken to. I don't know how much Patricia knows, or what she's planning to do. David let out a frustrated sigh, rubbing his temples. This is exactly what I've been afraid of. Patricia's spies are everywhere. She has eyes in every corner, every place we thought was safe. And if Kyra's been watched, then we're all in danger. Elizabeth's mind raced, trying to piece everything together. If Patricia had been keeping such a close eye on Kyra, then that meant they had to act quickly. They couldn't afford any more mistakes. They couldn't risk giving Patricia any further opportunity to sabotage their efforts. Kyra, what have they said to you? Elizabeth asked softly, trying to keep her voice calm. Did they threaten you? Did they try to make you do something? Kyra hesitated for a long moment before finally answering, her voice barely above a whisper. They've been trying to convince me to join them. They told me I could have everything I ever wanted, wealth, influence, power. They said all I had to do was help them bring you down. They said you'd never be able to expose Patricia's true nature. They said it would destroy me if I kept working with you. Elizabeth's stomach twisted in disgust. Patricia wasn't just a fraud, she was a master manipulator, using fear and threats to keep those closest to her under control. Kyra had been caught in her web, just as so many others had been. But Elizabeth wasn't about to back down. She wasn't about to let Patricia control her or Kyra. Kyra, you're not alone in this, Elizabeth said, her voice firm. We'll find a way to stop Patricia. We won't let her control us anymore. We have to stay united, no matter what. Kyra looked up at Elizabeth, her eyes filled with doubt. I want to help you, I do. But I don't know if I can. Patricia's power, it's too strong. She's already shown what she's capable of. I'm scared, Elizabeth. I don't know what will happen to me if I keep going against her. David interjected, his voice low but firm. Patricia feeds on fear. That's how she keeps people under her control. She uses intimidation, manipulation, and lies to make everyone afraid of what will happen if they try to break free. But the truth is, if we all stand together, we can defeat her. We just have to be strong. Elizabeth took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. We've come too far to stop now. Patricia has used everyone around her, her followers, her allies, even the people she's manipulated into doing her bidding. We're not going to let her get away with this anymore. Kyra's eyes softened, and for the first time, she seemed to believe Elizabeth. You're right, she said quietly. We've already started this fight. We can't let her win. I'll help you. I'll do whatever it takes to stop her. David stood up, his face set with determination. Good. But we need to be smart. We can't just go in guns blazing. Patricia has too many people on her side. We need to gather more evidence. We need to get people on our side who can help us take her down. Elizabeth nodded, her mind working quickly. We need to expose Patricia's lies, her fake miracles, her connections to the Marine Kingdom, everything. We have the proof now. We just need to make sure we have enough to convince the world. And we need to act fast. If we wait too long, Patricia will find a way to shut us down. David crossed his arms, his gaze sharp. We've got a long road ahead of us. But we take it one step at a time. We need to keep our heads down, keep gathering evidence, and build our case. And once we have everything we need, we strike. As the three of them sat together, the weight of the situation settled on their shoulders. The danger was real. Patricia was powerful, and her web of influence was far-reaching. But Elizabeth wasn't afraid anymore. She had seen the truth, and she knew there was no turning back. The fight wasn't just about exposing a fraudulent preacher, it was about breaking free from the chains of fear and control that Patricia had wrapped around her followers. They were stronger than Patricia realized. They had the truth on their side. And with each passing day, they would grow closer to bringing her down. Chapter 15, The Revelation. The air was thick with tension as Elizabeth, Kyra, and David sat together in their small, dimly lit hideout. It was a nondescript apartment on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that wouldn't attract attention. But the feeling of isolation was suffocating, and Elizabeth couldn't shake the growing sense that they were being watched. It wasn't just paranoia anymore, it was reality. Patricia's spies were everywhere, and with every step they took, the walls seemed to close in tighter. Kyra had been visibly shaken since their last conversation. The fear of what Patricia might do to her was written all over her face. But Elizabeth could see the flicker of resolve starting to return to Kyra's eyes. It had been hard for Kyra to trust that they could win, but now that they were getting closer to the truth, she was beginning to understand the depth of what was at stake. "We are running out of time," Elizabeth said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but underneath, there was an edge of urgency. Patricia's power is growing every day. She's controlling everything: politics, business, even law enforcement. If we don't act soon, she'll make sure we disappear. We can't wait any longer. David leaned forward, his eyes narrowed with concern. "You're right. But we have to be careful. This isn't just about exposing her. It's about destroying her entire network. If we go after Patricia, we'll be going after the very foundation of everything she's built. She won't let us tear it down without a fight." Elizabeth's eyes hardened with determination. "I've seen the damage Patricia has done. I've seen the way she's manipulated people, the way she's twisted their lives. We can't let her keep doing this. The world has to know who she really is." Kyra nodded slowly, her hands trembling in her lap. "But what if we don't have enough evidence? What if she comes for us before we are ready? We don't have all the pieces yet. Elizabeth stood up, walking over to the window and staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, but the city seemed to pulse with a hidden darkness, a darkness that Patricia had cultivated and used to her advantage. It wasn't just about the fake miracles or the lies, it was about the power Patricia had stolen from innocent people, and the way she had used it to manipulate the world around her. We don't need all the pieces, Elizabeth said, her voice low but resolute. We've seen enough. We've seen the truth. Patricia isn't just a fraud, she's using her connection to the Marine Kingdom to control everything. We can expose her ties to them, we can expose the rituals, the sacrifices, the manipulation. That's all we need. David nodded. You're right. The truth is our weapon. But we have to be careful. Patricia won't just stand by and let us expose her. She's got too much power, too many resources. If she suspects anything, she'll take us down. Elizabeth turned to face him. We'll take the risk. We've already risked too much to back out now. We can't let her continue this charade. We have to strike before she gets any stronger. Kara looked between them, her face filled with concern. But how do we expose her? What's the plan? Elizabeth walked back to the table and pulled out a folder filled with their evidence. The documents, photos, and videos they had gathered over the past few weeks were now laid out before them like pieces of a puzzle. They had witnessed the stage healings, heard the confessions from former followers, and gathered testimonies from those who had fallen victim to Patricia's manipulation. They had proof of the donations, proof of Patricia's ties to powerful figures, and proof of the dark rituals she had been conducting behind closed doors. We'll go public, Elizabeth said, her voice unwavering. We'll take everything we have and release it to the media. The world needs to see who Patricia really is. We'll expose her lies, her manipulation, and her ties to the Marine Kingdom. David frowned. That's a risky move, Elizabeth. If we do that, Patricia will retaliate. She has the resources to bury us. We can't just go public without a plan. We need witnesses, Elizabeth said, glancing at Kyra. People who've been close to Patricia, people who've seen what she's done. We need to gather them and bring them forward. Only then will people believe us. We can't do this alone. Kyra's eyes widened as she looked at Elizabeth. You want me to go back to the church? To the people who've been following Patricia all this time? Elizabeth nodded. We don't have a choice. We need their testimonies. We need the people who have been manipulated by Patricia to stand with us, to expose her for who she really is. If we are going to take her down, we have to show the world how deep her control really goes. Kyra hesitated, her eyes filled with doubt. But they won't believe me. They'll think I'm lying. They'll think I'm trying to tear down their faith. Elizabeth placed a hand on Kyra's shoulder, offering a comforting smile. They'll believe you, Kyra. They'll believe the truth. We just have to make sure they see it. And we have to stay strong. Patricia has spent years building her empire on lies. We are going to bring it down. David leaned back in his chair, his face tense. We can't waste time. We need to move quickly. Patricia won't give us much more time before she realizes we're on to her. And once she knows we're coming for her, she'll stop at nothing to make us disappear. Elizabeth's heart raced as she thought of everything they had at stake. The church, the people, the city, it was all under Patricia's control. If they didn't act now, if they didn't expose her for what she truly was, then everything would be lost. She turned back to the table and began organizing the evidence. We'll get the witnesses. We'll release everything we have, and we'll make sure Patricia's empire crumbles. We're the only ones who can stop her. As Elizabeth looked at her two closest allies, the weight of the task ahead settled over her. But there was no turning back. The truth was their weapon, and together, they would bring down Patricia, no matter the cost. Chapter 16, The Final Move. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that gnawed at Elizabeth's nerves, making her second-guess every move she was about to make. The plan had been set in motion. There was no going back now. She had gathered all the evidence they needed, testimonies, photos, videos, and financial records that linked Patricia to a network of powerful figures. But the truth was still a fragile thing, easily shattered by the first whisper of doubt or the slightest threat of retribution. Elizabeth stood at the window, staring out at the city lights, her mind racing with thoughts of the next steps. She and her team were on the brink of something monumental. But with every passing hour, the sense of danger grew. Kyra was at the table, her fingers trembling as she went through the documents once again, making sure everything was in place. David was pacing the small room, his eyes scanning the door as if he expected someone to burst in at any moment. They were all on edge, knowing that once they took this final step, they were going to change everything. "Are you sure this is the right move?" David asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low, filled with a tension that matched the atmosphere in the room. "Once we release this, there's no turning back. We'll be in the open. Patricia will come for us." Elizabeth didn't hesitate. "I know what I'm doing. We've already seen the truth. It's not just about destroying Patricia, it's about saving the people she's deceived. If we don't do this, she'll keep manipulating them. She'll keep feeding off their fear and blind faith." Kyra looked up from the papers, her face pale but determined. "I mean, we've come too far to back down now." David stopped pacing and nodded. "All right. But we need to be careful. We've got to release this to the right channels. We can't just post it online or hand it over to the police. Patricia's got too many people in powerful places." Elizabeth clenched her fist, her mind sharp. "We'll go to the media. I've already made contact with someone who can help us get this into the public eye, someone who isn't afraid to challenge Patricia's empire. They'll make sure the truth gets out." The pieces were all falling into place. Elizabeth had been carefully planning this moment for weeks, making sure every detail was accounted for. She had the evidence, she had the witnesses, and now, they were ready to make the final push. "There's one more thing we need to do," Elizabeth said, her voice suddenly cold. "We need to confront Patricia. We need to expose her directly, show the world who she really is." David and Kyra both looked at her, startled. "You mean in front of our congregation?" Kyra asked, her eyes wide. "That's too dangerous. She'll never let us get close. She's already watching us." Elizabeth nodded. "I know. But it's the only way. If we show up with all the evidence, if we expose her in front of her followers, it will make an impact. We'll force her to reveal her true nature. People won't be able to deny it." David's face grew serious. "You're playing with fire. Patricia has been building this empire for years. If we go in, we are not just taking down a preacher. We are taking down an entire network. And she'll make sure we pay for it. We have to do it," Elizabeth said firmly. "We have no other choice. The longer we wait, the more people will fall into her trap. We need to act now, while we have the chance." David looked at Kyra, and then back at Elizabeth. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "All right. But we need to be prepared. Patricia will fight back. And we need to make sure we have all the evidence we can get before we confront her." Elizabeth agreed. "I've already arranged everything. The media's ready to go. They are going to air the story as soon as we release the evidence. It will be our only chance to expose her before she can retaliate." As they finalized the last details, the sense of urgency in the room was palpable. Every second felt like a ticking clock, counting down to the moment when they would confront Patricia, and everything they had worked for would be revealed. Later that evening, they gathered at the church, knowing that this would be the most dangerous part of their mission. Elizabeth's heart was pounding, but her resolve was unshakable. Patricia had built her empire on lies and deception. It was time to tear it down. They arrived under the cover of night, the church eerily quiet as they approached the back entrance. The air was thick with tension as they slipped inside, careful not to draw attention to themselves. Every corner of the church seemed to hold a secret, every shadow a watchful eye. They made their way to the back room, where Patricia kept the mirror, the source of her power, the conduit through which she had manipulated so many. The room was dark, but there, in the center, stood the mirror, its surface gleaming with a faint, almost hypnotic glow. Elizabeth walked up to it, her hand steady as she took in the sight of it. This was it. The symbol of Patricia's manipulation. The tool she had used to control so many people. And now, it was the key to their victory. "We do this now," Elizabeth said, her voice low but firm. "Once we expose her, we can't stop. We'll have to go public immediately. No turning back." Kyra took a deep breath. "Let's do it. Let's end this." With a nod from Elizabeth, they stepped forward, gathering the evidence and preparing to confront Patricia in front of the entire congregation. It was time for the world to see the truth. It was time for Patricia's reign to end. As they made their way to the stage, they could hear the murmur of voices from the crowd. The congregation was waiting, unaware that the woman they worshipped was about to be exposed for who she truly was. Patricia had made a deal with the devil, and now, the truth was going to come out. Chapter 16 has been expanded to 1,000 words, setting the stage for the final confrontation with Patricia. Elizabeth, Kyra, and David are preparing to expose Patricia's lies in front of her congregation, knowing that this will be the most dangerous part of their mission. The tension builds as they make their move, and the stage is set for the ultimate revelation. Chapter 17, The Exposure. The lights in the church were dim, the only illumination coming from the flickering stage lights and the small candle holders that lined the walls. The congregation was gathered, their faces a mixture of anticipation and reverence, waiting for the woman they trusted, the woman they believed to be their prophetess, to take the stage. They had no idea what was about to unfold. Elizabeth, Kyra, and David stood backstage, their hearts racing as they watched the crowd. The air was thick with tension, each breath they took feeling heavier than the last. The plan was simple: get the truth out in front of Patricia's followers, make sure they saw who she really was, and expose everything. But Elizabeth knew it wouldn't be that simple. Patricia wasn't just going to stand idly by and let them destroy everything she had built. There would be resistance. There would be a fight. Elizabeth glanced at her two companions. Kyra was visibly nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she held onto the folder filled with the evidence they had gathered. The documents, the testimonies, the videos, they were their ammunition. They had everything they needed to bring Patricia down, but the real challenge was getting the people in the congregation to see the truth. David was tense, his eyes scanning the room as he paced back and forth. "We can't hesitate," he said, his voice low. "Once we step out there, it's all or nothing. Patricia will try to shut us down. But we need to stay calm. Stick to the plan." Elizabeth nodded, her jaw set with determination. "We've come this far. There's no turning back now. We have the truth, and we are going to make sure it gets out." Kyra took a deep breath, then spoke in a voice that was almost too quiet to hear. "But what if they don't believe us? What if they think we're just trying to tear Patricia down because we're jealous or bitter?" David walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "They'll believe the truth, Kyra. The truth doesn't need to be defended, it speaks for itself. People may be afraid, they may be loyal, but when they see the evidence, when they understand what Patricia really is, they won't be able to ignore it." Kyra looked at him, her expression filled with uncertainty. "I just hope you're right. I hope we're not too late." Elizabeth turned toward the stage, her eyes narrowing as she saw Patricia step into the spotlight. She was wearing her usual flowing white robes, her face glowing as she smiled warmly at the congregation. To the world, she was the embodiment of purity and light, the woman who had the power to heal, to deliver, to speak to God. But Elizabeth knew the truth. Patricia was nothing more than a puppet, controlled by dark forces, using her power to manipulate and deceive. "We are ready," Elizabeth said, her voice firm. "It's time." David nodded, and they made their way to the back of the church, slipping into the shadows just behind the stage. Patricia was beginning her sermon, her voice honeyed and smooth as she spoke to the crowd about faith and miracles. She was building up to her usual performance, her miracles, her staged healings, but this time, it was going to be different. This time, they would expose her. Elizabeth's heart pounded in her chest as she signaled to Kyra. "Get the video ready. This is our moment." Kyra quickly moved to a small table, connecting her phone to the projector. Elizabeth took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was about to come. They had to make Patricia break her facade. They had to make her admit the truth. Patricia's voice rose in volume, the congregation hanging on her every word as she began calling people to the stage for healing. Elizabeth could feel the heat rising in her chest. The woman in front of her was a fraud. A liar. And she was using people's pain, their desperation, for her own gain. Suddenly, Patricia stopped mid-sentence, her eyes scanning the crowd. She looked directly at Elizabeth, a sly smile crossing her face. "You," Patricia said, her voice laced with authority. "You've been quiet. You've been watching from the shadows. Come forward, child. Let's see what's troubling you." The entire room went silent. Every eye was on Elizabeth, and for a moment, she felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. But she didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her heart pounding, and approached the stage, the eyes of the congregation following her every move. Patricia's smile widened as Elizabeth reached the center of the stage, but there was something colder in her gaze now. Something calculating. "Now," Patricia said, her voice low and soothing. "Tell me what's on your heart, child. What do you need healing from?" Elizabeth didn't flinch. She knew what was coming next. Patricia would pretend to read her mind, pretend to know her deepest struggles. She would offer some vague words of wisdom, some promises of healing, and then the crowd would fall into a frenzy, praising her as a prophetess, a miracle worker. But this time, Elizabeth had a different plan. "I don't need healing," Elizabeth said, her voice strong and clear, carrying across the room. "What I need is to expose the truth." The crowd murmured in confusion, and Patricia's smile faltered for the briefest of moments. She recovered quickly, though, and stepped forward. "What are you talking about? This is a place of healing, of peace." "No," Elizabeth replied, her voice unwavering. "This is a place of deception. And I have proof." With that, Elizabeth pulled out her phone and activated the projector. The screen flickered to life, and images began flashing on the wall behind them, photos of staged healings, videos of people pretending to be healed, financial records that linked Patricia to influential businessmen, and the chilling footage of Patricia's rituals, the dark ceremonies she conducted in secret. The truth was there, in black and white. The room fell silent as the evidence was laid bare before the congregation. Patricia's face went pale, her composure cracking. For the first time, the veil was being lifted, and her carefully constructed world was starting to crumble. Elizabeth turned to face the crowd. "This is the real Patricia. She's using the Marine Kingdom's power to control your lives. She's been lying to you, manipulating your faith, and taking everything you have. She's not a prophetess, she's a fraud. And we're here to expose the truth." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Some of the members looked around in confusion, their eyes wide with disbelief. Others began to murmur, their whispers growing louder. It was happening. The truth was coming to light. Patricia stepped back, her eyes wild with fear and anger. "You don't understand. You don't know what you're doing," she shouted, her voice shaking with rage. "I am chosen. I am a servant of God." Elizabeth stood her ground, her voice steady. "You're nothing more than a puppet, Patricia. You sold your soul for power, and now everyone is going to know what you really are." The tension in the room was palpable as Patricia took another step back, her eyes flicking around the room for any sign of support. But the damage was done. The people were waking up. The illusion was broken. "Get out!" Patricia screamed, her face contorted with fury. "All of you. Leave now." But the crowd was already turning. Some of them were walking out, others were shaking their heads, still in disbelief, while some were beginning to question everything they had been taught. Elizabeth, Kyra, and David stood together, watching as Patricia's empire began to fall apart. It was over. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back. Chapter 18, The Fall. The atmosphere in the church had shifted dramatically. The once reverent and loyal congregation was now a mass of confusion, whispers, and disbelief. The faces that had once looked up to Patricia as a divine figure now reflected shock, anger, and doubt. The truth had been laid bare for all to see. Patricia, the woman they had worshipped and trusted, was nothing more than a fraud, using manipulation and dark powers to control them. Elizabeth stood at the front of the church, her heart still pounding in her chest from the confrontation, but she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had exposed the lies. She had brought down the empire that Patricia had carefully built for years. But as the chaos unfolded before her eyes, Elizabeth realized that this was just the beginning. The hardest part was yet to come. Patricia had retreated to the back of the church, her face twisted in fury, her once composed exterior shattered. Her followers, once fervent believers in her supposed powers, now stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. Some were beginning to leave, but many were still in shock, unsure of what to believe. The foundation of their faith had been shaken to its core. Elizabeth glanced over at Kyra and David, who stood beside her, both of them equally stunned by the scene unfolding in front of them. They had known this moment was coming, but seeing it play out was another thing entirely. Patricia, who had been untouchable for so long, was now vulnerable. The truth had stripped her of her power. "It's done," Elizabeth said, her voice filled with quiet triumph. But there was a weight in her words, a realization that they had only just begun to fight. "Now we just need to make sure the world knows what she really is." David gave a grim nod. "The media is already all over it. The footage we released, it's going viral. But this isn't over. Patricia won't go down without a fight. She'll try to turn this around, manipulate the situation, and discredit us." Kyra stepped closer to Elizabeth, her eyes filled with concern. "What happens now? Will people believe us? Will they really see her for who she is?" Elizabeth met Kyra's gaze, her eyes steady with resolve. "They have to. The truth is out there. It's on video, it's in the testimonies. People will see it. And even if Patricia tries to twist the narrative, they'll see the cracks. They'll see the lies. There's no going back now." Patricia suddenly emerged from the shadows, her face contorted with rage. She was no longer the calm, composed prophetess they had once known. This was a woman who had been exposed, her dark secrets spilled for all to see, and the anger in her eyes was unmistakable. "You think you've won?" Patricia's voice rang out, echoing in the silence of the church. "You think this is over? You think the truth will set you free? You have no idea what you're up against." Elizabeth stood her ground, facing Patricia with unwavering determination. "It's over, Patricia. You can't hide anymore. The truth has been exposed. And your reign of manipulation is finished. Patricia's lips curled into a cruel smile. You think exposing me will stop anything? Do you think you can destroy what I've built? You're nothing. You'll never understand the power I wield. You can't defeat me. Kyra stepped forward, her voice shaky but growing in strength. You've been using people for years, Patricia. You've been playing on their faith, their hopes, their desperation. You're not a prophetess. You're a liar, a fraud, and you'll be exposed for what you really are. For a moment, Patricia looked at Kyra with cold, calculating eyes. Then, without warning, she lunged forward, her hands reaching for Kyra's throat. It happened so quickly, Elizabeth barely had time to react. Kyra gasped, stumbling back, but Patricia's grip was too strong. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze as Elizabeth watched in horror. Kyra's face turned red, her eyes wide with fear. Without thinking, Elizabeth sprang into action, grabbing Patricia's wrist and yanking it away from Kyra. Let go of her, she shouted, her heart pounding in her chest. Patricia snarled in fury, her eyes flashing with dark energy. You think you can stop me? You're just as weak as the rest of them. David stepped in, pulling Patricia away with surprising strength. That's enough, he shouted. You've lost. Your lies are exposed. You've manipulated people for far too long. Patricia staggered back, her breath ragged, but her eyes were filled with hatred. This isn't over. It will never be over. You can't destroy me. I'll destroy you first. Elizabeth felt a chill run down her spine as Patricia's words hung in the air. She had seen the dark power Patricia wielded, the way she used fear and manipulation to control her followers. But now, in the face of exposure, Patricia's true nature was coming through, a woman desperate to hold onto the power she had once commanded. And that desperation made her more dangerous than ever. Kyra collapsed into David's arms, gasping for air, her hands still clutching at her throat. Elizabeth rushed to her side, checking to make sure she was okay. Kyra's eyes were wide with fear, but she managed to nod, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm fine. I didn't expect her to. It's okay, Elizabeth said, her voice gentle but firm. She won't hurt you again. We've exposed her for what she is. It's over. But even as Elizabeth said the words, she knew that Patricia wasn't finished. She might have been exposed, but she wasn't going down without a fight. And now that the truth had come out, Patricia would stop at nothing to regain control. Elizabeth turned to face Patricia one last time, her voice steady with resolve. You're finished, Patricia. You can't hide anymore. People are seeing the truth, and they won't follow you anymore. Your power is gone. Patricia's eyes flickered with fear, but she quickly masked it with rage. You think you've won, but you haven't. You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it. Elizabeth didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth had already been revealed. The rest of the world would see Patricia for who she truly was. And no amount of threats or anger would change that. Chapter 19, The Chaos Unleashed. The world outside the church had changed in an instant. The crowd, which had once been under Patricia's spell, was now reeling from the truth. Elizabeth stood in the middle of the chaos, her heart still racing from the confrontation. The feeling of victory was fleeting. Patricia may have been exposed, but the real battle had just begun. Kyra was still trembling, her hands shaking as she clutched Elizabeth's arm. Her wide, fearful eyes kept darting around the room, scanning the people who had once adored Patricia. Some of them were still staring in shock, while others had begun murmuring among themselves, trying to process the truth. The cracks in Patricia's empire were wide, but they were only beginning to show. David stood beside them, his face set in grim determination. We've done it, he said, his voice low. The truth is out. But now we need to make sure it sticks. We need to make sure Patricia doesn't spin this around. Elizabeth nodded, her mind already working through their next move. We need to get to the media, fast. The footage we've shown here is just the beginning. We have more proof, more testimonies. We have to release everything now, while the people in this church are still processing what they've seen. We can't give Patricia any more time to regroup. But as the words left her mouth, a cold shiver ran down her spine. The air in the church had shifted. The energy was different now, charged with fear and disbelief. Patricia had been exposed, but her power wasn't gone. It was just buried beneath the surface, waiting to resurface with more force than ever. Suddenly, a voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. You think you can take her down that easily? The voice was low, but it carried through the room with chilling authority. Elizabeth turned to see one of Patricia's most loyal followers, Elder Mermaid, standing near the back of the room. His face was twisted in anger, his fist clenched tightly at his sides. You don't understand, Mermaid continued, his voice rising with rage. You've exposed her, but you've only unleashed something far darker. You've made a mistake, and now, you'll pay the price. Kyra's breath hitched as she clutched Elizabeth's arm tighter. What is he talking about? What does he mean? David stepped forward, his jaw clenched. We've seen what Patricia is capable of. We know what she's tied to. If they think they can stop us with threats, they're wrong. But Mermaid wasn't backing down. You think you've won, but Patricia is just a vessel. You've uncovered the surface, but there's a deeper power at play here. The Marine Kingdom isn't something you can expose so easily. They'll come for you. They'll destroy everything you hold dear. Elizabeth's heart skipped a beat. She had known that exposing Patricia wouldn't be easy, but this was different. This was the very heart of the danger they had been up against. The Marine Kingdom. Mermaid took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. Patricia's power isn't hers alone. She's merely a conduit. And the Marine Kingdom doesn't let go of what's theirs. The atmosphere in the room grew thick with tension. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in. Elizabeth felt the weight of Mermaid's words, a realization dawning on her. This wasn't just about Patricia. It was about something much bigger, something more ancient, more dangerous than she could have imagined. David was the first to speak, his voice low and firm. If you think for 1 second that we're backing down, you're wrong. You've all been deceived, manipulated. The truth is out now, and nothing can change that. Mermaid's eyes flashed with fury. You haven't seen the full picture. Patricia is a queen among us. She's chosen. And the Marine Kingdom doesn't forget its own. Elizabeth stepped forward, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. We've seen enough. We've exposed her lies. And we'll keep fighting until the truth is known. It's not just about Patricia. It's about the people you've hurt. The lives you've destroyed. Mermaid's smile was cold, devoid of warmth. You think this is about saving people? You think this is about stopping Patricia? No. You've opened a door you can't close. The Marine Kingdom will make sure you regret this. Before Elizabeth could respond, Mermaid turned and stormed toward the exit, his steps quick and determined. His words lingered in the air, a chilling reminder that the battle was far from over. Patricia's exposure had sent shockwaves through the church, but Mermaid's warning made it clear that the true battle had only just begun. Elizabeth stood there, her mind spinning with the weight of everything that had just happened. We have to move fast, she said, her voice low but resolute. We need to get to the media, and we need to make sure the truth spreads before Patricia and her followers can do any more damage. David nodded. But we also need to prepare for what comes next. If Mermaid's right, and the Marine Kingdom is involved, then we're not just dealing with a false prophetess. We are dealing with a much larger force, something that's been operating in the shadows for centuries. Kyra looked terrified, but her resolve was starting to harden. What do we do now? Elizabeth took a deep breath, her heart still racing but her mind clear. We fight. We expose everything. And we make sure that no one is left in the dark about what Patricia truly is. We can't stop now. The room was silent for a moment, the tension hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. But in that silence, Elizabeth knew one thing for sure: the truth had been revealed. The first step was done. Now, they had to make sure it stayed exposed. The battle wasn't just for Patricia's ministry. It was for the future, for the people who had been manipulated, for the lives that had been destroyed. And Elizabeth, Kyra, and David were the only ones who could bring it all down. Chapter 20, The Final Confrontation. The city was alive with the hum of activity, but for Elizabeth, it felt like the calm before the storm. Everything had led to this moment. The evidence was out. The truth had been revealed. But now, the question was no longer about what Patricia had done. It was about what would happen next. The Marine Kingdom had been awakened, and Elizabeth had no illusions about the threat they posed. They had tried to do things the right way, gathering evidence, exposing the lies, bringing everything to light. But in the end, it had only made the enemy stronger. Olamide's warning echoed in her mind: the Marine Kingdom doesn't forget its own. They were not dealing with just one woman's deceit. Patricia was a mere player in a far darker game. Kyra and David sat across from her, their faces tense with worry. They had seen the chaos unfold since their confrontation with Patricia, but now the true gravity of the situation was sinking in. I never thought it would come to this, Kyra said, her voice shaky. Patricia was dangerous enough, but the Marine Kingdom. This is bigger than anything I imagined. Elizabeth nodded, her jaw clenched. We've only seen the surface of it. But we have to stop it, Kyra. We can't let them keep manipulating people. We can't let Patricia have any more power. David leaned forward, his brow furrowed in thought. We've exposed Patricia, but Olamide's right, this is far from over. We've made enemies, and not just any enemies. These are people with power, with connections. They have influence in ways we can't even comprehend. Elizabeth's heart raced, but her resolve never wavered. I don't care how powerful they are. I don't care about their influence. They've hurt too many people. They've destroyed too many lives. It's time to end it. David met her gaze, his eyes sharp. You're right. But we have to be smart. Patricia's going to retaliate, and we need to be ready. We can't take them down head-on, we'll have to expose them one by one, chip away at their power until there's nothing left. Kyra nodded slowly. I've been thinking about this. We have the evidence, but we need to get it into the hands of the right people. We can't just go to the police, they're compromised. We need to reach out to people who aren't connected to Patricia's network. We need journalists, activists, anyone who can help us spread the truth. Elizabeth stood up, pacing the room. The tension was unbearable, but she knew they were right. They had to take this fight to the people. They couldn't let the darkness continue to spread. We'll do that, Elizabeth said, her voice steady with determination. We'll get the evidence to the right people. And we'll expose the Marine Kingdom for what it is. We can't let Patricia continue her reign of deception. As she spoke, she felt the weight of the task ahead. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for every person who had been manipulated, every life that had been ruined. The stakes had never been higher. But Elizabeth knew that they couldn't do it alone. They needed help. They needed allies who weren't afraid to stand up to the forces Patricia had aligned herself with. But where would they find those people? Who could they trust? Suddenly, her phone buzzed, cutting through the heavy silence. Elizabeth picked it up, her heart skipping a beat as she saw the message. Meet me at the old warehouse. I have what you need. It was from Jacob, the informant who had first told them about Patricia's dark rituals and her connection to the marine kingdom. Elizabeth knew that Jacob had been working quietly, gathering information on his own, but she hadn't expected him to reach out now. She turned to Kara and David. We need to go. Jacob has information. It could be what we need to finish this. David's eyes narrowed. Be careful, Elizabeth. We don't know who Jacob really is. This could be a trap. Elizabeth nodded. I know. But we don't have any other options. We need to take the risk. We are running out of time. They gathered their things and left the apartment, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The night was darker than usual, the shadows seeming to stretch and move as if they were alive. The city felt different now. There was a sense of foreboding in the air, a feeling that everything they had been working toward was about to come to a head. The old warehouse stood at the edge of the city, a decaying structure that had long since been abandoned. As they approached, Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into the lion's den. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and she could feel the weight of her fear pushing against her resolve. They entered the warehouse cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. Jacob was waiting for them, his face obscured by the dim light, but his eyes were sharp and knowing. You're here, Jacob said, his voice low and urgent. And you're not going to like what I have to say. Elizabeth stepped forward, her voice steady. What is it? What did you find? Jacob's face grew more serious. I've been digging deeper into Patricia's connections. There's more to this than you know. The marine kingdom isn't just using her. She's part of something much bigger. A network of people, businessmen, politicians, even law enforcement officers. They're all tied together, and they're all working for the same goal. Elizabeth's stomach churned. What goal? Jacob hesitated for a moment before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. To take control of the city. To use the marine kingdom's power to create a new world order. Patricia is just one piece of the puzzle, but she's been helping them build it. And now, it's too late. They've infiltrated everything. The media. The police. The government. No one is safe. Elizabeth's mind reeled as she processed his words. They weren't just fighting for justice anymore, they were fighting for the future of the entire city. The fight was bigger than they had ever imagined. We have to stop them, Elizabeth said, her voice low but filled with conviction. We can't let them take control. Jacob nodded. I'll help you. But we need to move quickly. They know you're getting close. They'll come for you. Elizabeth knew what they had to do now. The stakes were higher than ever, and the path ahead was dangerous. But they couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the truth was finally within their reach.